When 62-year-old Margaret Williams walked into her son David's gleaming corporate office that Tuesday morning, she never imagined the words that would come out of his mouth would change everything between them forever. She had driven 45 minutes through Chicago traffic, carefully balancing a homemade apple pie on her passenger seat, excited to share some news with her successful executive son. The office building towered 30 floors high, and David's corner office on the 28th floor offered a breathtaking view of Lake Michigan. Margaret had always been proud of how far her boy had come from their modest beginnings in a small apartment on the south side. "Hi there, beautiful souls. I'm Tina, and I'm so grateful you've chosen to spend this time with me today. I've been sharing stories that touch hearts and change perspectives for years now, and today I have something truly special for you. This is a story about a mother's love, determination, and the incredible power of proving doubters wrong in the most unexpected way. If you've ever been underestimated because of your age, or if you've ever had someone you love dismiss your dreams, this story is going to resonate deeply with your soul. Stay with me until the very end, because what Margaret accomplishes will leave you absolutely speechless and maybe even inspire you to chase your own dreams, no matter what anyone says. Before we dive in, if this story touches your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe. It means the world to me and helps me bring you more incredible stories like this one. Margaret had spent the morning getting ready for this visit, choosing her best blue cardigan and taking extra time with her silver hair. She had worked as a librarian for 37 years before retiring 3 years ago, and though her hands showed the gentle signs of age, her mind remained sharp and her spirit vibrant. David had always been her pride and joy, her only child after years of trying to conceive. She had raised him mostly on her own after his father died when David was just 12 years old. Through scholarships, part-time jobs, and Margaret's unwavering support, David had graduated from Northwestern University with an MBA and now held a senior vice president position at Harrison & Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious consulting firms. "Mom, what brings you by the office today?" David asked, barely looking up from his computer screen as Margaret settled into the leather chair across from his massive mahogany desk. She noticed how tired he looked, with dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there a few months ago. His wife, Jennifer, had mentioned that David had been working 16-hour days trying to secure a promotion to executive vice president. The competition was fierce, and the pressure was clearly taking its toll on her son. "I brought you some of your favorite apple pie," Margaret said warmly, placing the covered dish on his desk. "And I have some exciting news to share with you, sweetheart." She had been volunteering at the local community center for the past year, helping seniors learn basic computer skills. What had started as a simple desire to keep busy in retirement had evolved into something much more meaningful. Margaret had discovered she had a real talent for teaching and connecting with people who, like herself, sometimes felt left behind by rapidly changing technology. David finally looked up from his screen, and Margaret could see the impatience flickering in his brown eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at her with such admiration when he was a little boy. "What kind of news, Mom?" he asked, glancing at his watch. "I have a client call in 15 minutes, so we need to make this quick." Margaret felt a small stab of disappointment, but pressed on with enthusiasm. She had been offered a part-time position as the community center's technology coordinator, and at her age, she was thrilled that someone still valued her skills and experience. "Well, you know how I've been volunteering at the West Side Community Center, teaching computer classes to seniors?" Margaret began, her voice bright with excitement. "The director, Mrs. Patterson, offered me a paid position as their new technology coordinator. It's part-time, 20 hours a week, but David, can you believe it? At my age, someone still wants to hire me. I'd be developing programs, training other volunteers, maybe even applying for grants to expand our services. I feel like I'm getting a second chance at a career, and I'm so excited about the possibilities." The silence that followed was not what Margaret had expected. David leaned back in his executive chair, and something cold seemed to settle over his features. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a tone Margaret had never heard directed at her before, dismissive, almost cruel in its casual brutality. "Mom, you're too old to work. This is ridiculous. You're 62 years old. You should be enjoying retirement, not pretending to have some kind of career. These people are probably just being nice to you because they feel sorry for you. Don't you think it's time to act your age and stop trying to prove something to the world? Margaret felt as though someone had physically slapped her. The words hung in the air between them like poison, and she could feel her cheeks burning with shame and hurt. She had expected David to be proud of her, maybe even excited about this new chapter in her life. Instead, he was looking at her as though she were a foolish old woman who didn't understand her place in the world. The son she had sacrificed everything for, the boy she had worked double shifts to support through college, was telling her she was too old to matter anymore. The drive home from David's office felt like the longest 45 minutes of Margaret's life. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the steering wheel, and she had to pull over twice because tears were blurring her vision. The untouched apple pie sat mockingly on her passenger seat, a symbol of the loving gesture that had been so cruelly dismissed. She kept replaying David's words in her mind. "You're too old to work. Don't you think it's time to act your age?" The casual cruelty of it cut deeper than any stranger's words ever could. This was her son, the child she had devoted her entire adult life to raising, telling her that her dreams and ambitions were somehow embarrassing or inappropriate for someone her age. When Margaret finally reached her modest two-bedroom house in Oak Park, the same house where she had raised David as a single mother, she sat in her driveway for a long time before going inside. The neighborhood had changed over the years, with young families moving in and renovating the old craftsman homes. Margaret often watched the children playing in their yards and remembered when David used to ride his bicycle up and down these same sidewalks. She had been so proud of him then, so sure that all her sacrifices had been worth it. Now she wondered if success had hardened her son's heart in ways she never could have imagined. That evening, Margaret called her best friend Eleanor, who lived 3 houses down and had been her confidant for over 20 years. Eleanor listened patiently as Margaret recounted the painful scene in David's office, occasionally making sympathetic sounds or muttering under her breath about ungrateful children. "Honey, I'm so sorry he said those things to you," Eleanor said when Margaret finished her story. "But you know what? Maybe this is exactly the wake-up call you needed. Not about your age or your capabilities, Lord knows you're sharper than most people half your age, but about who your son has become." Eleanor's words stung because they contained a truth Margaret had been trying to ignore for months. David had been changing, becoming more distant and self-absorbed as his career success grew. He rarely called anymore unless he needed something, and when they did talk, he seemed impatient and distracted. Margaret had blamed it on work stress, but perhaps it went deeper than that. Perhaps the son she had raised to be ambitious and successful had also learned to look down on people he perceived as less important than himself, including his own mother. Over the next few days, Margaret found herself thinking constantly about her situation. She had officially accepted the position at the community center despite David's harsh words, but the joy had been tainted by his rejection. She threw herself into the work with determined energy, developing new curriculum for digital literacy classes and researching grant opportunities to expand their programs. Her students, mostly seniors like herself who were intimidated by smartphones and computers, responded to her patient teaching style with genuine gratitude and enthusiasm. Many of them shared stories of being dismissed by younger family members who rolled their eyes at their technological struggles. One afternoon, while helping 74-year-old Robert Martinez set up his first email account, Margaret had what she would later describe as her light bulb moment. Robert was a retired carpenter who had built half the houses in their neighborhood with his own hands, but his grandson had told him he was too old to understand computers and should just stick to what he knows. As Margaret watched Robert's face light up when he successfully sent his first email to his sister in Mexico, she realized something profound. Age wasn't making them irrelevant. Other people's prejudices were trying to make them invisible. That evening, Margaret sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and began researching something that had been percolating in the back of her mind for weeks. Harrison & Associates, David's prestigious consulting firm, had been in the news recently for their struggles with employee retention and workplace culture issues. Several articles mentioned that the company was actively seeking consulting services to help them address generational diversity and age discrimination in their hiring practices. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. The same company where her son worked as a senior vice president was publicly struggling with exactly the kind of bias he had shown toward her. Margaret spent hours that night reading everything she could find about Harrison and Associates. She discovered that they had recently lost 2 major clients due to discrimination lawsuits filed by older employees who claimed they had been passed over for promotions and subjected to age-related harassment. The company's reputation was taking a hit, and according to several business publications, they were desperately seeking outside expertise to help them rebuild their image and create more inclusive workplace policies. My dear friends, I can see where this incredible story is heading, and I know you can feel it too. There's something so powerful about watching someone transform pain into purpose, isn't there? If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever been told you're too old, too inexperienced, or just not enough, I want you to know that you're not alone. Your dreams matter at every age, and sometimes the people who doubt us the most give us exactly the motivation we need to prove them wrong. Please, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I share stories like this one every week, and I'd love to have you as part of our beautiful community. Also, drop a comment below and tell me about a time when someone underestimated you. I read every single comment, and your stories inspire the content I create. Margaret spent the following weekend in what she jokingly called her research cave. Her dining room table covered with printouts, legal pads filled with notes, and her laptop displaying multiple browser tabs about workplace consulting and age discrimination. She had always been methodical and thorough, traits that had served her well during her library career and were proving invaluable now. The more she learned about Harrison and Associates' problems, the more convinced she became that she might have something valuable to offer. Her years of experience working with people of all ages, combined with her recent deep dive into the challenges facing older workers, had given her insights that younger consultants might miss entirely. She began crafting what she privately called Project Perspective, a comprehensive consulting proposal focused on bridging generational gaps in the workplace and creating authentic inclusivity policies. Margaret drew from her decades of experience managing diverse teams at the library, her current work with seniors learning new technologies, and her extensive research into best practices for age-inclusive workplaces. What emerged was a proposal that was both deeply personal and thoroughly professional, informed by lived experience rather than just theoretical knowledge. The genius of Margaret's plan wasn't just in its thoroughness, it was in its complete anonymity. She created a new professional identity as M.J. Williams Consulting, using her middle name Jane to create the initials. Her business address was a post office box, and her phone number went through a Google Voice account that she could manage from her home. On paper, M.J. Williams appeared to be exactly what Harrison and Associates was looking for: an experienced consultant specializing in workplace diversity and generational inclusion, with an impressive portfolio of research and innovative approaches to solving their specific problems. Margaret spent weeks perfecting her proposal, drawing on her research skills to create a document that was both compelling and comprehensive. She outlined a 3-phase consulting process that would begin with anonymous employee surveys to assess the current workplace culture, followed by targeted training sessions for management, and concluding with the implementation of new policies designed to foster genuine inclusivity across all age groups. Her pricing was competitive but not suspiciously low, and her timeline was realistic yet ambitious enough to appeal to a company desperate for quick results. The most challenging part of her plan was creating the professional credentials that would make M.J. Williams Consulting credible. Margaret couldn't lie about qualifications she didn't have, but she could present her genuine experience in ways that highlighted its relevance to corporate consulting. Her master's degree in library science became expertise in information management and research methodology. Her 37 years of managing library staff and programs became 3 decades of experience in organizational development and team leadership. Her volunteer work at the community center became specialization in intergenerational communication and technology adoption strategies. When Margaret finally submitted her proposal through Harrison and Associates' online portal, she felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration that reminded her of the day she had started college at age 25 as a single mother. She was taking an enormous risk, not just professionally, but emotionally. If her plan failed, she would have to live with the knowledge that perhaps David had been right about her limitations. But if it succeeded, she would prove something much more important than her professional competence. She would demonstrate that wisdom, experience, and determination could triumph over prejudice and dismissal. The response came faster than Margaret had expected. Within 3 days, she received an email requesting a phone interview with Harrison and Associates Human Resources Director, a woman named Patricia Hendricks. Margaret spent hours preparing for that call, practicing speaking in a professional tone that wouldn't reveal her age or personal connection to the company. She researched Patricia's background, familiarized herself with current HR terminology, and prepared thoughtful answers to potential questions about her consulting methodology. The interview went better than Margaret had dared to hope. Patricia seemed genuinely impressed with MJ. Williams' understanding of their specific challenges and the innovative approaches outlined in the proposal. Margaret spoke confidently about creating survey instruments that would reveal hidden biases, developing training programs that went beyond typical diversity workshops, and implementing accountability measures that would create lasting change rather than superficial compliance. Her years of dealing with difficult patrons, managing resistant staff members, and navigating bureaucratic challenges had prepared her well for corporate consulting, even if she hadn't realized it at the time. By the end of the call, Patricia was enthusiastic about moving forward with MJ Williams Consulting. They scheduled a follow-up meeting for the following week, and Patricia mentioned that several senior executives, including some vice presidents, would likely want to be involved in the initial planning sessions. Margaret felt her heart race when she realized that David would probably be included in those meetings. The prospect of sitting across a conference table from her son while he remained completely unaware of her identity was both thrilling and terrifying. That evening, Margaret called Eleanor to share the incredible news. Her friend was amazed by the audacity of the plan and slightly worried about the potential consequences. "What are you going to do when they find out who you really are?" Eleanor asked. "And more importantly, what's going to happen between you and David when he realizes what you've done?" Margaret had been wrestling with those same questions, but she had come to a surprising conclusion. She was no longer primarily concerned with David's reaction or approval. This had started as a way to prove him wrong, but it had evolved into something much more significant, a way to prove to herself that her value didn't diminish with her age. The first official meeting with Harrison and Associates took place on a rainy Thursday morning in their downtown conference room, the same building where Margaret had visited David just 3 weeks earlier. She arrived 30 minutes early, wanting to familiarize herself with the layout and calm her nerves before the presentation that would either launch her secret consulting career or expose her completely. Margaret had chosen her outfit carefully, a sophisticated charcoal gray suit that she had purchased specifically for this role, paired with her grandmother's pearl earrings for luck and confidence. Looking at herself in the lobby's polished chrome surfaces, she saw MJ Williams, professional consultant, rather than Margaret Williams, dismissed mother. The conference room was impressive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River and a massive table that could seat 20 people. Margaret set up her materials methodically, arranging her presentation folders and testing her laptop connection to their projection system. She had prepared meticulously for this moment, creating professional handouts, detailed timelines, and comprehensive budget breakdowns that demonstrated both her competence and her understanding of corporate expectations. Her hands were steady as she arranged everything perfectly, but her heart was racing with anticipation and barely controlled excitement. Patricia Hendricks arrived first, followed by 3 other executives Margaret didn't recognize, and then, inevitably, David walked through the conference room door. Margaret felt her breath catch for just a moment as she watched her son enter the room, looking polished and confident in his navy suit and red tie. He glanced at her briefly, just another middle-aged consultant in professional attire, and his expression showed nothing more than polite disinterest. The irony of the moment was almost overwhelming. The son who had told her she was too old to work was about to sit through a presentation by his own mother, completely oblivious to her identity. "Good morning, everyone," Margaret began in the slightly deeper, more measured tone she had been practicing for weeks. "I'm MJ Williams, and I'm here today to present a comprehensive solution to the generational inclusion challenges that Harrison and Associates has been facing. She launched into her presentation with confidence that surprised even herself, drawing on decades of experience managing diverse teams and her recent intensive research into workplace discrimination. Her slides were professional and compelling, filled with statistics, case studies, and innovative solutions that address the specific problems facing the company. David sat across the table from her, occasionally taking notes and nodding thoughtfully at particular points in her presentation. Margaret found herself studying his face, looking for any flicker of recognition. But there was none. To him, she was simply MJ Williams, a competent consultant who seemed to understand their challenges better than the previous firms they had interviewed. When she presented her analysis of how age-related biases were affecting employee retention and client relationships, David actually leaned forward with interest, apparently fascinated by insights that came directly from his mother's lived experience. The questions that followed her presentation were thorough and challenging, exactly what Margaret had expected from a company of Harrison and Associates caliber. Patricia asked about implementation timelines, another executive inquired about measuring success metrics, and a third wanted details about training methodologies. Margaret answered each question with authority and specificity, drawing on her research and her intuitive understanding of workplace dynamics. When David finally spoke, his question caught her off guard with its perceptiveness. MJ, your proposal mentions creating authentic intergenerational dialogue rather than just standard diversity training, David said, his voice carrying the same analytical tone he had inherited from his mother. Can you elaborate on what that looks like in practice? How do you prevent it from becoming just another corporate exercise that people endure rather than embrace? Margaret felt a surge of pride at the thoughtfulness of his question, even as she recognized the irony that he was asking his own mother to explain how to bridge generational gaps. Margaret's answer drew from her real-world experience at the community center, though she presented it as previous consulting work. She described creating structured opportunities for employees of different ages to share their perspectives on common challenges, facilitating mentorship programs that flowed in both directions, and developing communication strategies that honored both traditional wisdom and innovative thinking. As she spoke, she watched David's expression grow more engaged, and she realized that despite their personal conflict, her son was genuinely interested in solving these workplace problems effectively. The meeting concluded with unanimous enthusiasm for moving forward with MJ Williams Consulting. Patricia outlined the contract terms, which were more generous than Margaret had dared to hope, and they scheduled regular check-in meetings throughout the 3-month consulting period. As everyone shook hands and exchanged business cards, David approached Margaret with a professional smile and extended his hand. I'm looking forward to working with you on this project, MJ, he said. Your insights are exactly what we need here. Margaret shook her son's hand, maintaining her professional composure while internally marveling at the complete absurdity of the situation. Walking out of the building that morning, Margaret felt transformed in ways she hadn't expected. This was no longer just about proving David wrong or seeking revenge for his hurtful words. She had discovered something profound about herself, that her decades of experience, her hard-won wisdom, and her unique perspective on intergenerational challenges were genuinely valuable in ways the corporate world desperately needed. MJ Williams wasn't just a disguise. She was an authentic expression of Margaret's professional capabilities that had been waiting years for the right opportunity to emerge. Over the following weeks, Margaret threw herself into her secret consulting role with an energy and passion she hadn't felt in years. Working as MJ Williams required her to develop new skills and confidence levels that stretched her in unexpected directions. She spent her mornings at the community center, continuing her official part-time role as technology coordinator, and her afternoons and evenings working on Harrison and Associates project. The dual identity was exhausting but exhilarating, like living two completely different lives that somehow both felt authentically hers. Her first major task was designing and implementing the anonymous employee survey that would assess the current workplace culture at Harrison and Associates. Margaret drew on her research background to create questions that would reveal hidden biases and unspoken assumptions about age, experience, and workplace value. She crafted the survey to uncover not just obvious discrimination, but the subtle ways that different generations misunderstood and undervalued each other. The results, when they came in, were even more revealing than she had anticipated. The survey responses painted a picture of a workplace deeply divided along generational lines, with older employees feeling dismissed and marginalized, while younger workers felt pressure to constantly prove themselves through innovation rather than steady competence. Many respondents shared stories that echoed Margaret's own experience with David, being told they were too old to understand new technologies or too young to handle serious responsibilities. The data revealed that Harrison and Associates was losing valuable talent from both ends of the age spectrum, creating a homogeneous middle ground that lacked both wisdom and fresh perspectives. Margaret compiled the survey results into a comprehensive report that she knew would be difficult for the company's leadership to ignore. The numbers were stark. 63% of employees over 50 reported feeling undervalued, while 47% of employees under 30 felt their ideas were dismissed as unrealistic. Client satisfaction scores showed a clear correlation between successful project outcomes and teams that included diverse age ranges. Yet the company's informal mentorship and collaboration patterns consistently segregated employees into age-based groups. The report's presentation meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon, and Margaret knew that David would be there along with the other senior executives. She had prepared extensively, not just for the professional aspects of the presentation, but for the emotional challenge of watching her son react to findings that directly contradicted his assumptions about age and workplace value. The conference room was packed when she arrived, with representatives from every department crowded around the familiar massive table. The results of your employee survey reveal some challenging truths about Harrison and Associates' workplace culture, Margaret began, her MJ Williams persona now feeling as natural as her own skin. But they also point toward opportunities for competitive advantage that your company is currently missing. She clicked through her presentation slides methodically, watching the faces around the table as the data revealed the extent of their generational divide problems. David's reaction was particularly fascinating to observe. As the survey results painted a picture of widespread age-related bias and missed opportunities, his expression grew increasingly troubled. Margaret could see him processing the information, connecting it to situations he had probably witnessed or participated in without fully recognizing their significance. When she presented the correlation between age-diverse teams and successful client outcomes, David actually wrote several notes and circled them emphatically. The most powerful moment came when Margaret shared anonymized quotes from survey respondents. She had carefully selected responses that illustrated both sides of the generational divide, including several that resonated directly with her own experience. One senior employee wrote, "My supervisor told me I was too old to understand our new client management system, but I had been managing client relationships successfully for 15 years before that system even existed," Margaret read, watching David's face carefully. Another respondent noted, "I feel like my experience is seen as a liability rather than an asset, as if everything I learned before 2010 is somehow irrelevant." The discussion that followed was intense and revealing. Patricia Hendricks acknowledged that the company had been unconsciously perpetuating exactly the kind of biases we thought we were avoiding. Another executive admitted that they had been focusing so much on digital innovation that we forgot the value of institutional knowledge. David, when he finally spoke, surprised Margaret with his thoughtfulness. "These results suggest that we're not just failing our older employees," he said. "We're actually undermining our own success by creating artificial barriers between different types of expertise." As the meeting concluded, Patricia asked MJ Williams to proceed immediately to Phase 2 of the consulting project, designing and implementing training programs that would address the specific issues revealed by the survey. The timeline was aggressive, requiring Margaret to develop comprehensive training modules within 3 weeks. But the contract terms reflected the urgency and importance the company now placed on solving these problems. Walking out of that meeting, Margaret felt a profound sense of accomplishment mixed with growing anticipation for what would happen when her true identity was eventually revealed. That evening, Margaret called Eleanor to share the incredible developments, but she found herself talking less about the professional success and more about watching David's genuine engagement with issues of workplace fairness and inclusion. "You know what's strange?" Margaret told her friend. "Seeing him in that environment, responding to these problems with real concern and intelligence, reminded me of the thoughtful boy I raised. Maybe his harsh words to me came from a different place than I thought. Maybe from his own insecurities about aging in a youth-obsessed industry. My beautiful friends, can you feel the power of this transformation?" Margaret isn't just proving her professional worth, she's discovering parts of herself that have been dormant for years. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give us is underestimating us, because it forces us to find strength we didn't know we possessed. If this story is inspiring you to reconsider your own untapped potential, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to hear Margaret's message. I love reading your comments about your own experiences with being underestimated. Your stories fuel my passion for sharing these powerful journeys. What dreams have you been told you're too old, too inexperienced, or just not ready to pursue? Share them below, because I believe every single one of you has wisdom and capabilities the world needs to see. Margaret's training program development consumed the next 3 weeks of her life in the most fulfilling way imaginable. She designed a series of workshops that went far beyond typical corporate diversity training, creating experiential sessions that would force employees to confront their unconscious biases while building genuine appreciation for different generational perspectives. Her background in education served her well as she developed role-playing scenarios, case study discussions, and collaborative problem-solving exercises that would make the learning both memorable and applicable to real workplace situations. The cornerstone of her training program was something she called perspective exchange sessions, where employees of different ages would work together on actual company challenges while specifically focusing on how their different generational experiences informed their approach to solutions. Margaret had observed at the community center how powerful it could be when her senior students taught younger volunteers about patience and systematic thinking, while the younger people shared their intuitive understanding of new technologies. She wanted to recreate that mutual learning dynamic in the corporate environment. The first training session was scheduled for a Friday morning, and Margaret arrived early to set up the conference room with carefully planned seating arrangements designed to mix age groups naturally. She had prepared detailed facilitator notes, backup activities in case discussions stalled, and even contingency plans for potential resistance or conflict. Her years of managing library programs had taught her that successful group dynamics required meticulous planning combined with flexible responsiveness to unexpected developments. David arrived with the other participants, and Margaret watched him settle into his assigned seat next to a 26-year-old marketing associate named Jennifer, and across from a 54-year-old project manager named Robert. The grouping was intentional. Margaret had studied the employee survey responses to create combinations that would maximize learning opportunities while minimizing potential personality conflicts. She wanted each participant to have meaningful interactions with colleagues they might normally overlook or dismiss. "Good morning, everyone," Margaret began in her established MJ Williams voice. "Today we're going to explore something that affects every interaction you have in this workplace, whether you realize it or not. The assumptions we make about each other based on generational differences." She launched into an opening exercise where participants had to guess each other's ages and then discuss what factors influenced their estimates. The results were both humorous and revealing, highlighting how much people relied on stereotypes about technology use, communication styles, and career priorities. The breakthrough moment came during a problem-solving exercise where mixed-age teams had to develop strategies for improving client retention. Margaret watched fascinated as David's group struggled initially with communication differences. Jennifer wanted to brainstorm rapidly with lots of digital tools, while Robert preferred methodical analysis of existing data, and David seemed caught between wanting to appear innovative and recognizing the value of systematic approaches. The tension was palpable until Margaret intervened with a carefully timed coaching question. "David, you seem to be trying to balance different approaches to this problem," Margaret said, addressing her son directly while maintaining her professional consultant persona. "What if, instead of choosing between Jennifer's creative brainstorming and Robert's analytical framework, You found ways to sequence them so each approach strengthens the other? She watched David's face as he processed this suggestion, seeing the moment when he realized that the supposed conflict between generational approaches was actually a false choice. The transformation in David's team dynamics was remarkable. Once they stopped trying to choose between different generational approaches and started layering them strategically, their problem-solving became significantly more effective. Jennifer's rapid ideation provided raw material for Robert's systematic analysis, while Robert's thorough research informed Jennifer's creative solutions. David found himself naturally facilitating between the two approaches, using his position to translate and connect rather than judge or choose sides. During the afternoon reflection session, David made a comment that nearly broke Margaret's professional composure. "I'm realizing that I've been thinking about experience and innovation as opposites," he said thoughtfully. "But watching our team today, I can see that they actually need each other. Innovation without experience often leads to repeating old mistakes, while experience without innovation leads to missing new opportunities." Margaret felt tears threatening her eyes as she listened to her son articulate insights that directly contradicted everything he had said to her in his office. The training session concluded with participants creating action plans for applying their insights to their actual work relationships. Margaret was amazed by the quality and specificity of their commitments. People were volunteering to mentor across age lines, proposing mixed generational project teams, and identifying specific ways to leverage different types of expertise more effectively. David's action plan was particularly comprehensive, including commitments to actively seek input from both newer and more experienced team members, and challenge my own assumptions about what different generations can contribute. As participants filed out of the conference room, several stopped to thank MJ Williams personally for the insights and practical tools from the session. David was among the last to leave, and he approached Margaret with genuine enthusiasm. "This was incredibly valuable," he told her. "I've been in dozens of diversity trainings over the years, but this was the first one that actually changed how I think about working with people. Your approach to generational differences is revolutionary, treating them as complementary strengths rather than obstacles to overcome." Margaret shook her son's hand and maintained her professional demeanor, but inside, she was experiencing a complex mixture of pride, vindication, and growing anticipation about the moment when her true identity would be revealed. David was clearly capable of the wisdom and inclusivity she had always believed he possessed. He had just needed the right circumstances and guidance to access those qualities. The question now was whether his personal growth would extend to reconsidering his harsh judgment of his own mother's capabilities and ambitions. A revelação chegou 6 semanas depois, não através do planejamento de Margaret, mas por uma coincidência inesperada que ela não poderia ter orquestrado mesmo se tivesse tentado. Ela estava conduzindo a sessão final de avaliação de seu projeto de consultoria, apresentando dados abrangentes sobre as mudanças positivas que a Harrison & Associates havia experimentado desde a implementação de seu programa de inclusão geracional. Os números eram impressionantes. As pontuações de satisfação dos funcionários haviam aumentado em 32%. A retenção de clientes havia melhorado em 18% e as métricas de colaboração interna mostravam melhorias significativas em todos os grupos demográficos de idade. Margaret sentia orgulho genuíno dessas conquistas, sabendo que representavam melhorias reais na vida profissional das pessoas. Enquanto clicava através de cada slide, ela se pegou roubando olhares para David, que estava sentado 3 cadeiras abaixo da cabeceira da mesa de conferência, sua postura mais confiante do que ela havia visto em anos. A ironia não passou despercebida por ela de que estava apresentando dados sobre a transformação de seu próprio filho, sem que ele tivesse qualquer ideia de que sua mãe era a arquiteta de seu recente renascimento profissional. Seus dedos se apertaram em torno do controle remoto do projetor, enquanto ela observava David assentir pensativamente durante suas explicações, seus olhos brilhando com uma compreensão renovada dos conceitos que ela havia trabalhado tão cuidadosamente para incutir nele através de suas sessões de coaching disfarçadas. David estava entre os executivos reunidos para esta apresentação final. E Margaret notou que ele parecia mais relaxado e confiante do que ela havia visto em meses. O programa de treinamento claramente o havia afetado pessoal e profissionalmente. Ele estava contribuindo mais thoughtfully para as discussões, fazendo perguntas melhores e mostrando curiosidade genuína sobre as perspectivas de seus colegas, independentemente de sua idade ou nível de experiência. Durante um debate particularmente acalorado sobre cronogramas de implementação, Margaret assistiu David pausar antes de falar, um hábito que ele havia desenvolvido durante suas sessões de coaching, e então oferecer uma resposta medida que reconhecia tanto as preocupações de seus colegas mais jovens quanto a sabedoria dos membros mais experientes da equipe. Acho que precisamos considerar múltiplos pontos de vista aqui, ele havia dito, sua voz carregando uma maturidade recém-descoberta que fez o peito de Margaret apertar com orgulho maternal e satisfação profissional. Margaret percebeu que seu projeto secreto de consultoria havia alcançado algo que ela não esperava. Havia ajudado seu filho a se tornar uma versão melhor de si mesmo. Alguém que poderia navegar dinâmicas complexas do local de trabalho com empatia e pensamento estratégico, ao invés da arrogância defensiva que havia caracterizado sua abordagem anterior aos desafios de liderança. O brilho em seus olhos quando ele falava sobre colaboração intergeracional fazia seu coração acelerar com uma mistura de alegria materna e apreensão crescente sobre o que aconteceria quando a verdade finalmente viesse à tona. A reunião estava prosseguindo suavemente, até que Patricia Hendricks fez um anúncio que enviou o coração de Margaret, disparando como um adolescente pego tentando voltar para casa depois do toque de recolher. Antes de concluirmos a sessão de hoje, quero compartilhar algumas notícias emocionantes, disse Patricia com um sorriso que parecia iluminar toda a sala de conferência. A MJ. Williams Consulting foi selecionada para receber o Prêmio de Inovação no local de trabalho de Illinois por conquista excepcional em desenvolvimento organizacional. A cerimônia de premiação é na próxima semana, e a Harrison & Associates será apresentada como um estudo de caso no programa que será distribuído para empresas em toda a região. A compostura profissional cuidadosamente mantida de Margaret quase rachou quando aplausos eclodiram ao redor da mesa. E ela conseguiu o que esperava, parecer um sorriso gracioso, enquanto sua mente corria através das implicações deste reconhecimento inesperado. O prêmio representava a validação de tudo que ela havia conquistado, mas também significava o fim de seu anonimato cuidadosamente construído. Suas mãos tremeram ligeiramente enquanto ela segurava o ponteiro laser, se perguntando se alguém mais podia ouvir o trovão de suas batidas cardíacas ecoando em seus ouvidos como um solo de bateria em um auditório vazio. Ela podia sentir gotas de suor se formando em sua testa, apesar do ar-condicionado eficiente da sala de conferência, e teve que se forçar a manter contato visual com Patricia enquanto processava a magnitude do que estava acontecendo. Margaret sentiu o sangue drenar de seu rosto quando Patricia continuou explicando os detalhes da cerimônia de premiação, incluindo o fato de que a mídia local cobriria o evento e M.J. Williams seria entrevistada sobre suas abordagens inovadoras para a inclusão no local de trabalho. Haveria fotografias, entrevistas em vídeo e potencialmente até mesmo um artigo de destaque no Chicago Business Journal que seria distribuído para empresas em todo o meio-oeste. Sua identidade secreta estava prestes a ser exposta da maneira mais pública possível, e não havia como evitá-la sem abandonar tudo que ela havia trabalhado para construir ao longo dos últimos meses de construção cuidadosa de relacionamentos e reconstrução profissional. O peso do momento pressionou seus ombros como um casaco de inverno pesado, tornando difícil respirar enquanto ela percebeu que seu plano, cuidadosamente orquestrado, estava prestes a se desfazer de forma espetacular. Ela olhou novamente para David, que estava radiante de orgulho por fazer parte de uma transformação empresarial premiada, completamente inconsciente de que sua metamorfose profissional estava prestes a colidir com uma revelação familiar que mudaria tudo entre eles para sempre. Sua mente começou a correr através de cenários possíveis, cada um mais aterrorizante que o último, enquanto ela imaginava a expressão no rosto de David quando descobrisse que a consultora respeitada que havia transformado sua perspectiva profissional era, na verdade, a mesma mulher que ele havia descartado como irrelevante demais para o mundo moderno dos negócios.